welcome to Swan Island Dahlias. I'm Heather and this is Eric, and we're going to give you some help on how to divide your dahlias in the springtime. So it is late April and people have questions all the time about, can I leave my dahlias in? Do I have to store them? All kinds of questions. So earlier in the season, I dug up a clump in my own yard in about February, I think is when we did the video, and showed you that you could dig at that point. Really, you can dig anytime as long as it's been 2 weeks after a killing frost or mid-November. You are safe to dig anytime after that, which means all through winter and into spring. If you dig anytime earlier than about mid-April, you have got to store those tubers. They cannot be dug, divided, and replanted immediately. Once you disrupt the roots, you have to store them and replant them in the spring at their normal planting time. So dahlias get planted when the ground temperature is about 60 degrees. So today we are about 72 degrees. We've had plenty of nice warm weather here in the Northwest. We plant late April through May. So it's on the early side actually to be planting. Most people plant about Mother's Day in the northern half of the US. Southern half in the nicer, warmer climates, they're already planting or already planted maybe in March, depending on their climate. So today, we're gonna dig up a clump and it's completely, we have not touched this. This is our display garden here at the farm. It's not been touched since last summer, other than they were cut back. Eric, when did we cut these back? Did we cut them back in the winter?
Winter time.
So we cut these back in the winter. In our fields though, we leave the stalks until we're ready to dig, and you might have seen that on our digging videos. But these guys, the stalks were cut off earlier and we left them for the winter. Now we do recommend covering your area with plastic or some type of covering to try and keep the wetness off of them, because in the Northwest we could get a really cold snap and you could lose your tubers. Leaving them in the ground is not always a guarantee. So it's something you have to decide whether your ground drains well enough or whether you want to put plastic down and protect, maybe putting straw or leaves or dirt over that plastic to give it kind of blankets of warmth is what we like to think of it as. But these guys have been in, we haven't touched them last summer, and actually these clumps that we're gonna dig are 2 years old. They have been in our display garden for 2 years, so the clump might seem a little extra big.
Sorry, I couldn't.
Oh, we're going to go ahead and dig, wash off, and then we're gonna show you and talk about dividing real quickly, and then about replanting. So remember, it is late April. Once you see your dahlias coming up out of the ground, so this guy right here, you can see just a tiny little guy. He's about 2 inches tall. And it's really kind of hard to see, but he's about 2 inches tall. And at this point, you know it's warm enough to go ahead and dig your dahlias that have been left in the ground over the winter and divide them. So we're gonna let Eric go ahead. He's gonna work on a variety called Wildcat. So we don't know what we're gonna find under here, but we're going to find a clump that's been in the ground, like we said, 2 years. Might find a rotten stalk there. You might find a rotten clump. He's gonna take a peek. This is what you get when you do live. So this has a very small clump so far. He might have broke it in 2 pieces. But you can see those sprouts are already growing. So if you don't see sprouts coming through the ground and it's late April, it just means you had a cooler spring and it won't hurt anything to wait a little while longer to dig. But at this point, we're gonna be able to dig and not have to store the tubers back in a garage or a cool location before we go ahead and replant. So in this case, I'm gonna let him go ahead and dig. Will you dig another clump? Let's see if we can find a bigger clump so we can show a little more here. So we're gonna dig up this guy and see what we find. So we like to use pitchforks. Pitchforks are great because you might stab an end of a tuber, but you're not cutting off a complete tuber end, although you have to know that a tuber that is connected still to the stalk will grow as long as it has enough nutrients and body. So that one's not too bad. We're gonna go ahead, do you wanna wash that one or do you wanna dig up another one?
I can wash this one.
Okay, so let's go ahead and wash that one. We can also wash this guy. Eric, I'll set it on the ground here for you. So it's really, really important if you plan to divide that you get all of the dirt off. So he's using a high pressure nozzle because he's got to get all of the dirt off up close to last year's stalk. Last year's stalk is where you're going to find the eyes. So none of the eyes are located out here on the body of the tubers. They're all located in next to the clump, into last year's stock. So it's got some nice eyes. Right now it's starting to send up just a couple here. It won't send up all of the eyes unless it needs to later. Once we divide it, then it would be more useful and it'll work harder. So at this point, we're gonna go ahead and set this guy aside. That guy's got a little bit of a rough skin on it. Do you want to try and dig another? We're gonna dig a few more here. We could just grab the voodoo if you want. We're gonna move over and he's gonna take a peek at voodoo. This has a much larger clump. So remember, this is a 2-year variety. This clump has been in here 2 years. So he's knocking all that dirt off. We do kind of have dream soil. So just remember, we're kind of lucky. You might not be able to do this with your soil, but waiting till the springtime is really important because then you have a better chance of having a little bit drier soil. So hopefully the movement of the camera is doing okay, but we're gonna wash this clump off. Just know that if he breaks one of the sprouts off, it's gonna re-sprout. So that is not a problem. That's one thing about dahlias that's a little different. Most of your bulbs do 1 sprout a year, and if that gets knocked off, then you're out of luck. But in a dahlia tuber, it actually will re-sprout many times if it gets knocked off or eaten by a slug or snail. So again, he's gotta get all of that dirt off close to last year's stock to be able to divide it properly and be able to see the eyes or the sprouts. So he's working extra hard because you've got so many eyes watching you. So Eric and I have both been vaccinated. We are not masked at the moment. We'll try and keep our distance, but I wanted to let you know we both were vaccinated 3 weeks ago. So we're gonna stay a little bit of distance apart just for safety, but with masks, it makes it very hard for you to hear us. So we're gonna stay without masks, and hopefully that isn't an issue because we feel safe, but we do wear masks if we're in close proximity, and all of our employees wear masks 100% of their day. So first of all, we've brought up those clumps. You can see the nice big sprouts coming up, the nice eyes that are popping. Very easy to see for about 24 to 48 hours. And then those guys would recede if you were putting them in storage. So same thing kind of in the fall time when we dig. When we dig, we can see eyes very clearly, and then they become more dormant over the winter. So just think about kind of if you're gonna wanna divide, you're gonna wanna do it right after digging, not setting them aside for a while. I'm gonna pause there. Gabby, do we have any questions yet?
Not yet, no.
We're cruising along. How are we doing? Everything good? Fabulous. If you have questions, make sure you holler and ask. Gabby will make sure she gets them relayed to us so that we can help answer them. So now you have to make a decision on how do you want to divide this clump. Remember I said that no eyes are located out here on the body of the tuber. They are all located in on last year's stock or near that. So it's really important that you do not just snap your tubers off, otherwise you have nothing. You have nutrients or meat for that tuber to survive off of, but no brain to be actually able to grow. So really important that you don't snap your tubers off. That's one of the biggest mistakes people do make, and it's just heartbreaking. I want to pause and tell you one more thing. If you had left this clump in the ground and did not divide, because not everybody divides every year, we recommend about every 2 to 3 years that you dig and divide just for the health of the tubers and the plant. But if you don't, it's really important that you don't allow 5 or 10 sprouts to come through the ground and compete all summer. Some people think, oh my God, I've got 5 sprouts. It's the best. Actually, you have 5 weak sprouts. You need to trim back so that you have 1 to 2 main stalks and no more. Really, you want strong starts. And if you have too many small sprouts competing against each other, they have a real struggle to thrive. So it's really important that if you leave that in, that you trim a couple sprouts back and only leave 1 to 2 for each growing season per variety or per clump. So in this case, we can divide this down to single tubers, but we recommend that you divide your clumps in half or in quarters. So we say bird's eye view, looking as if you were a bird flying, and you look down on this clump, you're gonna kind of just imaginary line through it. You're gonna divide it right in half, and you could do it again just like a pie and divide it again in half. That would give you 4 chunks, and most likely each of them is going to have an eye somewhere on that section. Now we can also get down to very single little tubers and just do single tubers, which is what all US growers sell. Or you don't have to, and you can do small sections, or you could do maybe eighths. This is a really big clump. But I want you to notice that there are sprouts coming up through the bottom. There are rotten tubers. We're just gonna trim off some of those guys. So Eric's gonna do a little cleanup work. But I want you to notice, you can see right in that center, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, there is 5 long sprouts trying to come up there. Those probably would try and be the dominant, although we might have a few more that try and come through. But these are last year's stalks. They're what grew last year on the plant, and we're gonna get rid of those. Those just a lot of times rot, and so they're not gonna be necessary. But again, don't snap these tubers off. You have nothing. Few of the tubers might have gotten a little damage from us digging. That won't hurt them at all. As long as you have the majority of the tuber, you are good to go. So Eric's gonna use what we call somewhat similar to like a leather knife. It's a dahlia dividing knife. It's got a nice hook on the end of it. We sell them. He uses a metal file, like something you would buy at maybe Amazon or a Napa Auto Parts or Ace Hardware. It's called a bastard file, but it's a metal file and it works wonders for getting in and sharpening those knives because of the nice hook. So he'll give you just a little sampling of how to sharpen it. If you buy a knife, you do need to get a file and sharpen it.
Will dahlias grow from seed development?
So we have one of our first questions while Eric's doing that the question is, will dahlias grow? Will dahlia tubers grow from seed once you've planted seeds? Yes. The first year you're going to get a very small clump. So it's important to save it and that you've started them early enough. But you will get a small clump the first year. It won't be what a true clump size would be for that variety, but it will give you an idea of what it's going to give you. It'll just be on a little smaller scale. Any other questions?
How long can tubers keep before planting?
So it depends. So the question was, how long can tubers be kept before planting? So tubers really need to be planted every year. It's very hard to keep them over a summer, fall, winter without planting them. So they're meant to be spring planted. They are not a fall planted. They are a tuber. They are thin skinned. If you get your tubers from us, you have between 1 and 2 months to be able to plant them. Although you want to plant them in your climate when you can start putting vegetables and things out. We want the ground temperature at least 60 degrees. So that means many 70 or so degree days before you can plant. If your nights are below 50, you're probably not planting at that time either. It's too much of a temperature change, it's too cold, and your ground isn't warm enough for the tubers to sprout. And you put these little bodies in there and they're too cold, they'll rot. So you are better off to wait closer to Mother's Day, middle of May for all the northern part of the US. Even if you have a couple beautiful, nice, warm days and you think, here's 3 days, I'm gonna go for it, and then you're gonna get rain and cold weather, don't do it. Better to wait. They will take off much quicker and faster if you wait a few weeks to plant when your soil's had a time to warm up. Otherwise, you're gonna risk losing them to rot. So how long can you wait to plant? Depends on where you are and it depends on your growing season. At this point, if somebody in California had, which maybe is in the 80s or 90s, they want to plant immediately. They do not want to wait because your soil temperature will get so warm and so hot during the day that those little tender shoots can burn. If you're in the northern half of the US, you got plenty of time to plant. We plant through about the middle of June. Just remember that things that planted, let's say middle to end of April, will be a little slower compared to something we plant the middle of May. It will take off faster and quicker because the soil is that much warmer. So hopefully I've answered that question. If not, ask it again in a different way and we'll get you taken care of.
Are sprouts the same as eyes?
Sprouts are. So are they the same as eyes? So an eye develops into your sprout. And I say an eye somewhat looks like a pimple or a whitehead, and that is what will pop and send the shoot out. Any other questions?
Yes, if the tuber was planted in a pot last year, can you replant this year?
If a tuber was planted in a pot last year, can we replant it in a pot again this year? Of course. You might want to divide it, but definitely it can be grown again in that pot, same dirt. Anything else?
Yes.
Hang on just a second. We got more questions we're going to answer.
If you planted some clumps and a few shoots are, few shoots are on top each other, can you split them split them if they're already sprouted?
So it sounds like we've got a clump planted, we've got multiple sprouts coming up, and you want to know whether you can split it. Yes, you're going to do exactly what we're doing today. You're going to dig it, wash it off good, and then you're going to divide it and watch what we do next.
Okay. I stored my tubers in peat moss in the garage over the winter, but now they're quite dried out and wrinkled. Will they still grow?
So are my tubers still viable if they've stored them in a garage in peat moss and they seem dried up or really wrinkled and dehydrated? So the biggest thing is going to be, do they have weight to them? If they are powder-like and falling apart in your hands, no, unfortunately they've dehydrated too far. If they're just wrinkly and ugly looking and still have weight to them, they are most likely still viable. So in your climate, you might want to remember that your garage or basement or wherever you're storing is very dry or has a lot of concrete, which is sucking the moisture out of the air. And you're going to need to check on those tubers about once a month and dampen your peat moss down. So if you're struggling with them dehydrating, most likely there just isn't enough moisture in that peat moss for your tubers all winter. So they should be viable if they've still got some weight to them. Don't soak them, don't do anything. You cannot revive a wrinkled, shriveled, ugly looking tuber. All you can do is plant it and let it take in the warmth of the soil and get regenerated and growing.
If I'm planting rooted cuttings, how many tubers can I expect them to produce the first year? And does planting the plants with a set of leaves under the soil help create moss? Create more. So first of all, on a cutting, it's going to totally depend on the variety. So a cutting is going to make a smaller clump. Go ahead and talk about cuttings.
Okay, it's gonna be a smaller clumps, and probably going to be less ice if you just plant a regular tubers. Because for some reason they only have a few sprouts, not much.
So a cutting is only going to develop a small clump with a few eyes. It's not going to give you a big clump like this would give you or a normal tuber would. So it's kind of important to kind of know that if you're doing cuttings, you will get a small, kind of curled, gnarled little clump. They're not going to be straight out tubers like we're used to. And then what was the other half of the question? Sorry, you might have lost it.
Does planting the plant with a set of leaves under the soil help create more?
So where those leaf sets are is how we do cuttings. Those will send out roots right at those notches. So if you are covering up part of your plant and it has leaves that are going to be under, you want to be pinching off those leaves so it can root there and not covering up an entire plant. So if you have a 4-inch plant and you're transplanting it into a 4 to 6 inches deep, you don't want to cover up that entire plant because it's got leaves and things. It needs to take in the sunlight at that point. So you would cover it up slowly as it gets a little taller, never covering it up completely.
What's the best way to keep tubers before planting? I received some from a friend in a plastic bag.
So ideally tubers really need to be in peat. We like peat moss the best. Some type of medium that's going to keep them from dehydrating. So we like slightly dampened peat moss. I know some people are concerned with using peat moss. You can use shavings, pet bedding and things, but those have all been kiln dried. So they are bone dry and they're going to take in the moisture from your tubers. So it's really important that you moisten those shavings down just slightly. Same thing with peat moss. If you use it year after year, you'll want to moisten it down just a little bit by misting it down or mixing some in a bucket with a little bit of water. You never want it wet. Never want your shavings or peat moss wet. You want it cool to the touch or damp, just so you know that it's got some moisture and it's not so dusty dry. And then we don't recommend plastic bags in most scenarios because they will rot or mold. But if you're in a place that struggles with keeping your tubers from dehydrating, you might try plastic bags with a few holes in them. But you're going to want to need to keep them in some type of medium if you're waiting to plant.
Do you want to stop and do?
Let's go ahead and stop and then we'll come back to questions here in a minute. So now that we're going to divide, we're going to go back to what I kind of talked about that bird's eye view looking down on the clump. So we can divide it in half, we can divide it in quarters, and we can go down even less than that. So Eric, let's first try and divide it in half to give kind of an idea. There are 2 stalks on there, kind of one I broke off and one that's maybe last year's stalk and maybe one was the year before. So he's literally, this is a little hard on a 2-year clump, but he's literally going to go right straight through the middle here. He's going to break some of those sprouts off and you might just cringe. It's okay. They will re-sprout as I told you at the beginning. So now he's got 2 sections. Those could be replanted just like that, or we could thin it down. If you have more friends and want to share or want more plants, you can keep going. So he's gonna go, let's try and divide those in quarters. So, I mean in half, so we end up with quarters. Okay. I'm asking him to do oddness because this is not how he would divide a clump if he were in the warehouse. This is not the usual of what we normally do. So now he's got 2 pieces there, and we're gonna end up with 4 pieces here in a minute. Now I've told you, he's kind of cut some pieces of the tubers, not gonna hurt anything. He had to do a little bit of that to get through the clump, but now he's got 4 sections. You now have 4 plants. You went from 1 clump to 4. So this time you could decide, well, you know what? I think I wanna plant those 4, or you could divide them down even smaller. So we're gonna go a little smaller, although I'm gonna leave one, let's leave one chunk so we can talk about and show how you would replant it. So pick one of the clumps we'll just keep to use in a little bit. But let's go ahead and divide that down lower. So that one he was able to just pull right off, and you can see it already has its nice long sprouts on it. These are coming off pretty easy from your cut marks. So you can see all those eyes in there. Will you point with your knife real clearly and kind of show? See how an eye looks kind of like a whitehead? Sometimes they get dried up a little bit if they're more dormant, but these guys are nice and fresh and rooted and ready to go because they were left in over the winter. So you can see all those little eyes on that. There is nothing wrong with that tuber when you see 3 or 4 little eyes. There's been so much talk of leafy gall and crown gall and different things. Those are diseases or viruses that can be transferred in dahlias. But truly, I think the world needs to just slow down a little bit. It's not as rampant. We do see it come in maybe a little bit more from Dutch varieties than US. We are inspected by the Oregon Ag Department yearly to be able to ship all of our dahlias. Tubers are inspected. So if we see anything in question, we're gonna get rid of it and hope that it never makes it to your yard or garden. So if you have questions about something, you're welcome to reach out, but we're gonna be adding some more information and maybe hopefully doing some more videos down the line about that. So if you ever have questions about something or worried about something, don't ever throw it out before you send us pictures or ask our advice, because we'll tell you honestly what you think you need to do or if it's something we need to take care of. So he's divided these tubers down, and you can see that guy's got, what, 4 eyes on it?
4 eyes.
Just fine. That is not leafy gall. Leafy gall is more lettuce looking, where you have tons of eyes coming out of one narrow spot or one little spot. This is just a happy, healthy tuber with 4 eyes. So it's ready to go. Now remember, as I said, all of the meat, the nutrients for the tuber to grow is out in this body. The brain to do any growing is on last year's stock. So you must have an eye or eyes connected to each tuber. You will always have some junk pieces. You can see some of the things that broke off. Those are junk. Those will not grow. They do not have an eye or a brain connected to them, so they're not going to grow at all for you. So we can go further on this if somebody has questions. Any questions on dividing?
Not on dividing.
Not on dividing. Okay, well, let's pause and take a few more questions.
Okay, every year I get light yellow veining in the leaves, but plant seems healthy. What could this mean?
So light yellow veining depends. Sometimes if it follows the veins exactly, then it can be a virus, although it also can be a magnesium or a nitrogen deficiency. So we would tell you to add some Epsom salts along with a little bit of higher nitrogen and see if it improves. We'd also make sure that you are spraying for pests or insects. A lot of times people send us pictures of plants that they believe maybe they're a little curled or a little bothered, bumpiness on the leaves. It's really all insects, and it's insects you're not seeing, but they're sucking the juices out of those leaves and bothering them. So if you don't have a good spraying regimen in place, I would definitely recommend it. I know a lot of people are against spraying, but there's all different sprays. A lot of the safe things such as canola oils or oil-based will smother the eggs and the live bugs in all 3 stages, so that will help a lot, a little bit safer. Neem is a great product, although it's more productive or more useful in a preventative situation than when you have a problem that already exists. And then there are things like Bayer and different chemicals on the market that are your overall general garden insect killers, and they're great. They take care of disease, they take care of mites, and they take care of all your other little buggies. So I know some people are really afraid. Just remember, here on the farm, we can't use anything that would bother our bees, because we need the bees. The bees are what do our cross-pollinating and how we get new varieties. So it's really important that we not hurt our bees. And we get questions all the time about whether we use the neonicotinoids, and we do not. We need the bees. The bees are an essential part of our staff here at the farm, and without them, we'd be in trouble. Well, we get a bee sting, but not very often.
No.
Very rarely do we get any bee stings. So, any other questions? Gabby?
Power.
Are we good? Are we still going? One ended, she said.
It says the video ended on Facebook.
Do you want to help him?
Says it's live.
Hang on, we're just taking a little pause to make sure video's still running underneath the ground so that it can push and work its way through the soil to gain some strength. So hopefully that took care of that question.
You can keep going, Abby.
Okay, let's keep going now. Okay, so we've decided we've got them down to the size clumps that we want for now. We've got some single tubers and we've got some sections, and we'll show you on planting both of these. Brennan, can we move forward or do you need to stay? We're good? So bone meal is a great product for getting your dahlias started. But if you have critters such as raccoons, squirrels, dogs that might be in your garden or in your area, I would recommend that you skip bone meal. It's not 100% necessary. You can live without it because literally it is some ground up bone, and those critters will be attracted to it and will dig up your dahlia tubers to try and get to the product. So I would skip it. It's not necessary, as I said. It's great if you can do it, but not required. So we will add it here in these holes just because we don't have any critters that we're going to be attracting. And let me grab my gloves. Okay, so Eric, where are we going to plant? You want to make a couple holes for us and take a couple sections with you? We'll get a couple tubers. We're going to plant. Sorry for the extra noise. We are situated near a small airport, and some days it's noisier than others, and they just love when we're outside, I think. Okay, so he's made some nice deep holes here. So remember, your dahlia tubers need to be planted 4 to 6 inches deep. Brennan, I'm gonna have you pop up for a second. I'm gonna talk. So now that we know we've divided, we cannot put these guys back in the ground immediately. We need to imagine overnight, we've waited 8 or 10 hours or maybe 24 hours, then we can move to this step. So this is a little, you gotta kind of just think in your brain and move ahead at 24 hours because these cuts on the tubers that we just made need time to heal. So when you make a fresh cut, we would prefer that it not go into the ground immediately and that it has time to heal. So kind of like a cut on your hand. You want it to scab up before you expose it. And that's just to make sure, for safety reasons, it's not going to pick up anything from the soil and it's had a chance to scab over. So you cannot plant immediately if you are just dividing. You need to wait overnight. So let's just imagine, because we're going to be doing this for live, for video, that it's been 24 hours. It's the next day. Now I can plant these tubers. So here's a clump, a small clump, Eric. And here's a 2, and here's a single. We're gonna show you when we plant these guys. So we've dug a hole 4 to 6 inches deep, at least. How much bone meal should I use? We get this question all the time. We would say a small handful, and I mean a small handful, probably 1/8 of a cup. Probably could be a little bit more than that. And what I'm gonna do is just drop it in the hole, sprinkle it around, but then I'm gonna work it in the soil a little bit because I don't wanna put my tuber directly sitting on a pile of bone meal, correct?
Yes.
Really important to do that. So now Eric's gonna go ahead and put the tubers in. We lay them horizontally. Don't cover them up because I'm gonna put a stake in if you would. So we lay them horizontally. So those tubers are laying on their side. We don't want to stand the tuber up. Would you kind of show in this next one? I'm going to do the same thing here. We're going to put this bone meal in, mix it around a little, and then he can lay the tubers in. So really, like these, we've kind of talked, these tubers are self-contained. Really, they don't need a lot of nutrients added to them. The bone meal will break down slowly and they'll be able to take that in. We will not add any water today. That might seem odd, But in the Northwest, we get a little bit of rain, although I will tell you we are not getting much rain this year. It's been a little more of a drought, but you can still see that our soil has enough moisture in it. We do not want to water these in daily or weekly unless we end up into the 80s or so, or maybe even 90 degrees for a week or two. Then we might worry about irrigation, but at this point they don't need any water until you see the green sprout above the ground. So we're gonna go ahead and cover these. Now there's a couple options. We could either cover them up completely, which is what most people do, and it's what we recommend. Or if you had a small plant that maybe you started indoors and are transplanting out, you could plant it 4 to 6 inches deep, because you need that tuber down 4 to 6 inches deep, and then you could slowly push the dirt up around the plant. So you can go ahead and cover those. We do a lot of what we call hilling or mounding. If you see these guys, we plant a little shallower when we start, and then during the growing season, we bring the dirt up around them to give them extra support so that we don't have to do as much staking. So these guys, you don't see stakes around them, but you see that we've mounded the dirt up, and that's something you could do at your own garden if you wanted. So we've covered these guys up completely. We expect to see sprouts in about 3 to 5 weeks. It's not ideal. You will not see them in a week. Don't panic. Some are slower, some are faster. I'm gonna have you do this one, and we're gonna put a stake in it, Eric, if you don't mind. So bone meal. Do you want my gloves or what? I'll do the bone meal so you don't have to touch it. So in this case, sorry Brennan, we're moving around. So in this case, again, we're gonna put the bone meal in, mix it around. Okay, and then it's ready to put the tuber in. Now at this time, this is a great time to add your stake. We do recommend staking any tubers that are over 3 feet tall. Just because a dog, wind, rain, weather, you never know, can come in and do some good damage to your garden. We sell 4 and 5 foot stakes, so 4 foot, 5 foot stakes, and either would work. I really recommend most of the time that we use the 5 foot stakes unless you have a really short plant, because by the time you put this in the ground about a foot or maybe 8-10 inches, you've lost part of the stake. It's best to do it right now. Brendan, if you come this way. I'm gonna give this to you, Eric. You can see the nice little sprout on the tuber right there. And if you put the stake in right now, you won't have to worry that you're gonna hit that stalk later on or hit the crown of the tuber later in the season. So it's a good time to do it right now. I tell you, this is a working farm. You're gonna hear lots of things going on in the background, and I apologize for all the noise. But please know that about 700 orders are shipping out today. We've got a cooler in the works. There seems to be all kinds of things. So please just bear with the noise for a few minutes while we get past this, and then it'll get a little quieter. We're gonna pause for just a second to give it a chance to get the noise level down. We have questions, so let's work on the questions since Gabby can read those off a little quicker for me while we're trying to, we'll come back here, Eric, in just a second.
My nursery didn't have bone meal, but said bulb tone was okay. Is that true?
Yep, that'll be just fine. You could use bulb tone, bone meal, blood meal, any of those, as long as you're using a small handful or 1/8 of a cup or a little less is probably about the right amount.
Do the cuttings need to heal over or be dusted with a mold inhibitor before going back into the ground?
Go ahead, you want to talk about cuttings? We use a root tone on them, which is a stimulator for growing roots, but we don't use any type of mold preventative or anything, no.
Okay. Do you have any recommendations for planting tubers with long sprouts? If above ground, they burn from the sun. If below, they rot.
Ooh, the sprouts are rotting or the tubers are rotting?
Emily Cleveland.
Emily Cleveland,
Let us
ask your
know.
question a little bit more for us so we can understand your question. Are the sprouts burning and rotting, or are the tubers rotting? If you're seeing tubers rot, it happens for a number of reasons, but most commonly it is that your ground is too wet or cold when you plant. The other reason is that it's too hot, it's too rich. Make sure you've not added chicken manure, you've not added mushroom compost, you've not added Miracle-Gro potting soil. All of those contain extreme high nitrogen, which will burn your dahlia tubers up before they can sprout. So if you've got long sprouts on them and you go to plant and those sprouts are burning up and the tubers are rotting, that's an indicator that the medium, the soil that they're in, is burning them to pieces and is too rich. And that you would have to get changed so that you could grow them. We recommend really just plain old garden dirt, plain topsoil. The only manure or compost we recommend is cow or steer manure. We do not want to see any of the mushroom compost. We do not want you using Miracle-Gro potting soil or soils that have had a lot of additives. Organic compost, you don't know what that is, and the problem is, if it's grass clippings or even at your own yard, if it's grass clippings, that's like straight nitrogen. And you may have used a weed killer on your grass, which now is transferring into your flower beds, which we don't want to do. We want to give these guys a chance to sprout. The other thing we get a lot of questions on is preen. We love preen. Preen can be used places, but it can't be used where you plan to use your plant your dahlias.
She said the sprouts.
So the sprouts are rotting. I'm going to go back to Emily's
You
question.
answered the question when you talked about cuttings or pinched off the sprouts, so they are only 2 inches above the tuber.
Okay, so that's the biggest thing is you've probably got just too long, too weak of a sprout, and maybe the temperature is too hot or the sun's too hot for them to push through that soil. So if you pinch those sprouts back, they should be able to slowly work through the soil. If for some reason your temperatures are in the hundreds, it's gonna make it much harder for those sprouts to get started, and you're gonna have to keep your soil a little damper. So somebody that's in a hot climate is going to have to water differently than how we water here at the farm. And if anybody needs that question answered, it's in our growing guide, but we can also cover it if somebody needs it. Just make sure you ask for it.
If you don't divide when growing in a raised bed, will the tubers be okay, or do they definitely need it every couple of years to prevent rot?
They definitely need it. What happens is every year the clump multiplies. And if you can imagine, soon you will have tubers growing out of the ground because it's multiplied so many times and never been divided. And what overall happens, some people say this doesn't, but from our experience, if you let a clump go a long time, it ends up spending its energy feeding those tubers. It's not worried about growing and blooming for you, it's worried about feeding. So if it's feeding and working really hard to keep those tubers alive, you don't end up with the amount of blooms you should have. So we truly believe they should be divided every 2 to 3 years so that you keep getting the true amount of blooms and a prolific plant like it should. Now some varieties are more prolific than others, so that can be variety to variety. But overall, we really would like you to go ahead and divide at least every 2 to 3 years.
If I need magnesium, what do I buy? What product do I buy?
Epsom salts is great for adding magnesium. So sometimes if we ever have a plant that's looking just a little yellow, maybe just a little deficient, we would say, or nitrogen deficient, we would tell you to go ahead and give it a boost of Miracle-Gro. Normally we say no Miracle-Gro, so listen carefully. But if you have a plant that's yellowing and everybody else seems to be doing great, there could be just a spot in your yard that's either a little depleted or needs a little extra, or maybe that variety just needs a little extra boost. So we would say 1 shot of Miracle-Gro with a little bit of Epsom salts added into it. And then about every 2 to 3 weeks, you would go back to your low nitrogen fertilizer. I guess that's about every 3 to 4 weeks we do the low nitrogen fertilizer on them. So Epsom salts is great to add closer to your blooming season, as it'll help with the bloom size, bloom color. So that's just a little hint there.
What if you use more than 1/8 of a cup or a handful of bone meal?
How much did you use? Whoever's asking, would you please reply back? And Cooper, go get Grandpa.
Do dahlias like fish fertilizer?
Fish fertilizer. So overall, most fish fertilizers are very high in nitrogen, although there are many on the market that are low nitrogen. But the main thing we'd want you to do is there are always 3 numbers to your fertilizers. The first is nitrogen. That's the one we need the lowest. So we would recommend, you do need some nitrogen. Only in late blooming season do you go with a 0 nitrogen to increase your bloom. But most times you need a low nitrogen fertilizer. And so I would be really careful on looking at your fertilizer numbers. The first number is nitrogen. You want that to be about half of your other 2 numbers that are listed. So a 4-8-10 or a 5-10-10 or a 8, 16, 16, anything similar to that will work just fine. We just don't want to see a 20, 10, 10. We don't want that first number to be the highest. So we had a question. I'm going to refer back to Nicholas for a second here. The question was, what if we used a cup of bone meal per hole and not an eighth of a cup or a quarter cup? Is it going to be detrimental? Could it burn the tuber? So he says,
as long as they work it in.
as long as you worked it in and did not lay the tuber directly on that big cup of bone meal, you're probably going to be okay.
It breaks down real slow.
Okay, it's real slow to break down. We just want to make sure in the future I would use a little less because you're just kind of wasting it in that hole.
If a tuber didn't sprout last year, it's done, right?
If it didn't sprout last year, it probably doesn't have an eye. So the biggest question is, you know, if a tuber doesn't grow, will it grow the next year? Yeah, usually not is the answer. I hate to disappoint somebody. We do guarantee all of our tubers. If you ever get one from us that doesn't pop up through the soil in 3 to 5 weeks, we want you to reach out before August 1st. We ideally want you to reach out immediately as soon as you haven't seen it pop up in 3 to 5 weeks so that we can address it and take care of it at that time. But if it's one you divided, most likely it probably just doesn't have an eye. Sometimes they just don't pop and sprout like they should, and we can see an eye.
If you used preen previously, how long do you have to wait till planting dahlia tubers?
Oh, preen is such a tricky thing. Preen says it's okay. If it's been a year, you're probably safe if you only did one application. If you've done many applications of preen, you're probably out of luck in that bed and would need to switch soil. So I would highly recommend that you not plant in the soil unless it's been a year and it was only one application.
Should Epsom salts be liquid or powder?
Usually it's powder, similar to the Epsom salts you can buy at the market, although they are at the grocery store. They make specific garden Epsom salts. I believe they're pretty similar. You might want to check, but I believe Epsom salt is Epsom salts.
What if you didn't know how to snip the shoots down to 2 inches and already divided, planted last night?
Not a huge crisis. The only problem is if you had really long sprouts and you put them back in the ground after digging them, then you're going to have weak plants that are going to fall over because those sprouts have to push back through the soil to have a sturdy, stocky, strong plant. If you've planted a long sprout in the ground, then it's going to be weak and have no strength to hold itself up.
Someone said, since I pretty much did everything wrong, should I dig them up and start over?
Oh, I hate that question. If you think you did it wrong, I would tell you if it hasn't been too long, yeah, I'd dig them up. I mean, I would hate to wait to find the answer out in August or September when things aren't growing the way they're supposed to. What did you think you did wrong? And maybe I can help alleviate and lessen the stress and maybe lessen the issue that you have. Because I'd hate to tell you to do extra work if it's not needed.
How far apart to plant dahlias?
Oh, that's a good question. We didn't cover that. So we recommend at minimum that they be 12 inches apart. So think about a ruler. They need to be at least that distance apart. They can be 3 or 2, 3, 4 feet apart, whatever you want. Our rows are about 40 inches apart and we can walk down the rows between them, but we brush against the plants during the season. But the tubers in each row are planted 12 inches apart approximately. So most people, I mean in here, let's see, we're probably 15, 18 inches?
Yeah.
We might be 12 inches in some of the spots because we kind of zigzag and go back and forth, kind of creating, or kind of go around the outside and put one in the middle, but we make sure we give them at least 12 inches space for each of the clumps to be able to adequately grow, take in water, take in nutrients. It's really important.
Can gophers and moles be a problem?
Oh, gophers and moles, Eric's favorite. So moles, no. Moles will move the dirt, move the tuber maybe around, but they won't eat it, they won't take it. Gophers, we have seen it just like a cartoon where they come across the field, find a variety that they like because maybe the tubers taste a little different, and they literally can go down a row taking the whole plant and tuber and gone. Eric does a lot of work in the summertime and springtime, I should say, trapping them. We don't use chemicals, we do just use the cinch traps on them, but they can be a nightmare and we can lose a whole crop or a whole variety.
Oh yeah, they eat very, very fast.
Yeah. Voles and gophers are the nightmare. So if you've got them, you're gonna have to find a way to protect your dahlias. And one way to do that is you can buy a mesh wire and line your hole, but make sure you come all the way up to the top of the hole. Otherwise, it'll learn to just go right down over your wire. So make sure your wire comes up to the top of your holes, or maybe even out the hole a little bit, and that'll work. Because even if they were able to maybe nibble on the end of a couple tubers, the majority of the clump and the sprouts are still protected in the middle of that. So you have any other suggestions? I know you can plant in pots and drop the whole pot in the ground. They might end up breaking that pot during the growing season, but it's another safety zone to get started in and try and protect them before they take them.
If I potted up some tubers, should I water them? We're not getting any rain in North California. How should I water them before they come up?
Yeah, so if you are in a dry, warm climate, I don't know what her temperatures are, but I'm guessing they're probably in the 70s or so. We did post today, we did a potting up your dahlias, starting them early video, and it got posted today on social media and on our YouTube channel for you to go back and reference at any time. We would tell you they need to be watered about once a week until you see the green sprout above the ground. And it should take about 3 weeks or so till we see the green sprout above the ground if they're in a nice warm location when they're sprouting. And then at that point, they're gonna need to be watered 3 and 4 times a week. But in the initial, we say about once a week in a pot, just because they really, like I talked about, they are self-contained little bodies that cannot sit in a puddle of water. They don't need water until they've got their roots out, and you know they've got their roots out when you see a green sprout above the ground. So that's your key to start watering and increasing. They do take a lot of water during the summer.
What if your beds are already mixed with Miracle-Gro?
Oh, you know, there's many different Miracle-Gro products. So the biggest thing would be to go back and look at what product did you use, how high was the nitrogen in ratio to the other components. They are sometimes give you like a 0.2 or a 0.02. Make sure you transfer those, think of those as like a percentage, and that those 3 numbers should be not high, because we don't want a high content of nitrogen. If you sprinkled it and mixed it in your bed, and you maybe got 10% of it with 90% soil, or maybe up to 25% of it, probably not an issue. If it's 90% Miracle-Gro soil or potting soil with 10% of your garden soil, you're probably in trouble and you're gonna be losing your tubers to rot, which we don't want you to do.
Someone wants to know, is your garden completely fenced in? Is that why you don't have raccoon or pest problems?
It's not fenced in. I don't know if Brendan can turn the camera a little bit, but it looks right out over our fields. Our garden is not fenced, so we have raccoons here on the farm. We only use bone meal when we're doing a few small plantings. Our field will not. It will be fertilized with a slow release fertilizer right after we plant, so we don't have time or a way to be able to do bone meal in the holes. But in our show garden, we do use it, and we don't have any problem with the raccoons. I think maybe we're just lucky. Maybe there's enough other stuff around the farm for them to take care of. So, questions?
Will this video be safe for later viewing?
We hope to. Yeah, I hope you can reference it back. There's so much information. I get kind of excited when we do these live videos just because I have so much information I want to share, and we kind of get off track and we end up going all over the board, and we never know what kind of questions we're going to get. But I really hope we can save these videos. We have created a YouTube channel. We've added all of our videos, I think, are on our social media page, so you can go reference them again. But subscribe to the YouTube channel so that you can see the videos over and over again if you want. We're going to keep producing them. We're going to keep putting them up there and trying to cover more and more information. So there is so much to learn. I learn more every day, and I've been here my entire life. So never stop learning. Eric, how many years have you been here?
20 years.
Eric's been with us 20 years. So he's one of the head foremen and amazing. He's got a lot of tractor work. He is in charge of our planting and those perfect straight rows you see. That's the stress level of what he has to handle, is to make sure our rows are straight. Yes?
Do you have to bring your tubers inside during the winter in the Pacific Northwest? Mine are growing in raised beds. Are there any other ways to protect them during the winter?
So we are lucky in the Pacific Northwest. It is never a guarantee to leave your tubers in over the winter, but most customers do better leaving them in than taking them out and letting the ground be your storage unit or your storage area. The biggest thing you need to remember is most people have very heavy soil in the Northwest, and in that case you need to put plastic down. Once we've got a frost in October or November, you want to go ahead and cut your dahlias back and put plastic down over the top, add some hay, some straw, some dirt, leaves, something to hold that plastic down. And what that does is keep the puddles of water that might not drain through very quickly off your dahlias so that they don't rot over the winter months. If you don't do that and you have an extremely wet winter, most likely you could lose your tubers to rot. If you're in a colder climate, you have to dig and store. They cannot be touched by freeze. If you freeze 4 to 6 inches deep, your tubers are gone. They cannot withstand freezing temperatures. So kind of just think about where you're at and what risk you want to take. Remember, if you put the plastic down, every layer of straw or soil or leaves that you add, those are like blankets. So you've added 1 blanket, 2 blankets, 3 blankets. You're adding warmth to the soil to keep those guys from rotting over the winter. Remember also that snow is a barrier and will keep your ground from getting colder. So we actually like it when it snows and is cold. We don't like it when it is just a dry freeze and it gets colder and colder every day without warming up during the daytime. So that's when you start to worry, because then you know it's freezing deeper every day.
What about mice and rats?
Mice and rats.
We don't have any problem with it.
Yeah, we don't have any trouble with them. Are they eating their tubers, eating the sprouts? Yeah, that's not something we have any problems with or that I hear much about.
My lows are in the 40s. Could I plant in raised beds with a bucket overnights?
You could. What are your daytime temperatures? Who is that?
Dolly Perry.
Dolly Perry, can you let us know what your daytime temperatures are or where you're kind of located so we can help you a little bit of what we think's best? 40s is a little cool at nighttime. We are not planted here on the farm. So the fields that Brendan showed you shortly a little bit ago are plain dirt. They have been tilled and are about ready, but they are not planted. We have not planted any dahlias here on the farm yet this year. Even though we've had a couple weeks of kind of warm, we dropped back off cold and rain. We're kind of leveling off right now, but we got to wait to make sure that we stay warm enough because we don't want to lose a crop.
If I plant them indoors in pots, how often do I give them water?
So again, we did a potting up starting dahlia early video that posted today. It's on YouTube, it's on social media. You might want to go back and watch that. If you're starting your dahlias in pots, you're going to be watering about 1 time a week until you see that sprout, and you got to make sure you've got them in a nice warm location that's a consistency of 70 degrees or above consistently to get them to sprout properly. But definitely go back and look at today's video we posted this morning because that's the video you want to watch.
That's all for now.
All right now. Okay.
There was one comment that I found awesome, and it says, "Has anyone ever told you you are amazing? You take the fear out of dahlias. Thanks."
Oh, we love it. This is our joy. This is our love. This is our passion. I spend more hours here at the farm than I do my home. Eric lives here on the property, so the same is to speak for him. But to say that he's been here 20 years and I've been here my entire life is a lot to say about our farm, our employees, our staff. Everybody is family to us. So kind of like I talked about those bees are part of our staff. We couldn't function without them. My kids would even tell you that we spend a lot of our hours here. But I love what I do. So, you know, how can you have a bad day when it's flowers? I mean, we just don't get it when somebody's having a crummy day. All you need to do is come out and see the fields during the summer and your day's made. You got it. It's beauty. Mother Nature gives us pretty awesome view to look at. Pretty lucky.
Oh yeah.
We have another noisy truck coming. Our postal truck is just leaving, so give us a second while he passes. And then we can move on. Do we have any more questions?
No, right now, no.
Okay. here goes the
Let's
truck.
take a pause and we watch the 700 packages leave.
That is an unmarked postal truck that's leaving. You can't tell. So something I didn't cover, and one of the biggest things I think most people have trouble with, and we hear comments of, I don't have those critters. I don't have them in my area. Guess what? We all have slugs and snails. Even if you don't think you have them, you have them. They might not be leaving trails, but we know the entire U.S. has slugs and snails. So they love your sprouts more than you do. So if you do not slug bait, guess who's going to eat those shoots? They're going to eat them every night before you ever see them. So make sure you are putting slug bait out. Probably not crucial today, but crucial in about the next week. If we stay nice and warm, those sprouts, some are going to come up really quick. Some are going to be a little slower, just depending on the variety. Make sure you're putting slug bait out. Make sure you continue to use it once your plants are above ground, because they will go up the stalk and eat some of those leaves, and you don't want them demolishing your plants without you knowing. So slug bait is probably the #1 required thing that everybody should do regardless, because even if you're not seeing trails, I used to see trails, and I swear the slugs and snails must be mutating a little because we're not seeing trails. It's crazy. The damage that they can do overnight is amazing. They might be slow, but they are definitely hungry at nighttime, and they will eat your sprouts every night at ground level, and you'll never see them come through. If you do not see your sprouts, and we ask you to dig up the tuber to see what it's doing, and whoops, and you dig this guy up, and I just broke him into pieces, and you dig him up, and he's got 4 or 5 long sprouts, and they're all blunt-ended about at your soil level. Guess what? Slugs and snails, and it's tried a new shoot over and over and over. Pretty soon it'll run out of energy if you don't protect it and give it a chance to grow, and those slugs and snails use up all of the energy with it trying to re-sprout. Any other questions?
Not yet.
Not yet. I love it. We've covered a lot of information. We do have loppers. These really nice loppers, if you don't have a pair of these guys, these are great for trimming off your stalks at the end of the season. Remember, you don't want to in October, November, depending on where you're located when you have your frost, you don't want to leave a straw up above the ground to fill with water. That will rot right down through your tubers, through the clump, and destroy them over the winter if you didn't put plastic over them to protect them. So definitely make sure you're lopping off those guys, or leaving the old stalks on is okay to do also till springtime, and then you can trim those guys back. Anything else?
Curling the leaves, question mark?
Curling of the leaves. So most of the time it's insect related, and it just means you've got some little pest that's sucking juices out of it. There are a few viruses, but it's not common. So we would first want to see pictures so we could help you diagnose, and we'd also ask, have you sprayed with anything to take care of those micro little buggies? Anything else? Well, I hope you have gotten lots of information. Hopefully you've seen, and we didn't tuck these in, but normally, and we will in our planting video that we show, we would highly recommend, and we want to hear your feedback. This is new this year to have the variety name tags. So this is all the same variety of wildcat that we were working on first. But these guys are new to your orders that we're shipping out this season. We hope to offer them at a different time, hopefully another year, for maybe tubers that you might have ordered from a previous year. But for now, they're coming in all of the orders for this year. But make sure you put these in when you plant. You'll know right where that tuber is, and no question about what variety is what when you go back. We definitely want to hear your feedback though. See how they do over the summer. This was a trial period, and we want to know what people think. So far, the feedback's been amazing and wonderful, but we kind of need to know how they do over the summer. So let us know your thoughts so we can either continue that or not continue
We
it.
have a couple more questions before
Ooh,
you
a couple more questions before we end.
What is a good tool to have to dig up?
Good tool to use. Pitchfork over here. Pitchfork's the best. Shovels, I know, are what everybody goes to, but it's really the best. So you do not chop all of your tubers off if you didn't go out wide enough. It might put a few holes or knock off a few chunks of tuber, but at least isn't chopping them all off. So best to use a pitchfork.
When to pinch?
What are you gonna say?
Use it.
Use it, yes. When to pinch your tubers. So these guys are going to come up in about 3 to 5 weeks. We recommend pinching or topping your dahlias when they're about 18 to 20 inches tall. So you're looking probably, if you're planting about now, probably the end of June is maybe when they're that tall. Maybe it's in the first couple weeks of July. Maybe you're already there if you're in a warmer climate. You will literally, it will have sets of leaves. You want to have it about 18 to 20 inches tall from the ground, and you're just going to go, it's not real scientific. I'll explain what we're doing, but you're just pinching out the top of the sprout, going down a set of leaves and pinching it out. What you're doing is stopping that center stalk that can end up being like a tree trunk. It literally can get really thick, and it ends up putting little tiny laterals off of it, and it seems to be a little top heavy. So best to stop that growth at that point. And what it does is at each leaf set below, it's going to send out side laterals, new stalks, and have a much bushier, rounder, happier, healthy plant that's a little more stable. And you'll have more laterals, more flowers, better for your plant.
Just planted some tubers yesterday because there's no frost in the forecast, but there are some lows down to 39 degrees. Should I cover them overnight with frost cloth?
I would. I'd either put plastic down or frost cloth down, something to warm up your ground even during the day for 2 or 3 weeks till you get past that point. Kind of create a mini greenhouse. If you can think about it, could be black plastic, could be clear plastic, and all you're doing is warming that ground up. So if you can use plastic, I would definitely do it, because you definitely want to bring that temperature up in the ground, because every day that you're down in the 30s, you're cooling the ground temperature, and it needs to be 60 degrees or more when you plant. So definitely if you're having that cold, it's probably not that warm, and you've got to bring the temperature up.
Can I grow dahlias in a large container, like 22-inch containers?
Yes, you can. We would recommend at least 15 inches in diameter per dahlia. 15 by 15 is the minimum size to grow a full season. A barrel, you could probably get away with doing 3 in a barrel, but that would be probably your max size-wise. But if you've got a 22-inch pot, you might be able to get 2 in there. Yeah, but pots are great. But again, the biggest thing is you've got to watch what soil you're putting in it, and that you're not just filling it with Miracle-Gro potting soil or something too rich. So we want to just see garden soil, plain topsoil. But remember, you're going to fertilize a little more often, and you want to check out our container growing instructions, because you're flushing the fertilizer through much quicker.
I have no idea what this word is, but what's your thoughts on dahlia?
Oh, let me come look at it. Hold on 1 second. Diatomaceous earth. Definitely, it's recommended. It's great to use with your dahlias. You can definitely use it. Any other questions?
Sometimes a variety's flower will go to pollen, not be very full petaled. This happens very infrequently with Swan Island dahlias, but with some of the inferior company's flowers.
So sometimes we do see dahlias pop their center, is what we call it. So we call it a popped center. Some varieties do it more often than others. And what it means is that you're supposed to have a full dahlia. You're not supposed to see a yellow pollen early on in the blooming age of the bloom. So if you've got, let's say, a 6 or 7 inch bloom, and it's pretty young bloom, maybe it's only half open, and you're starting to see that yellow pollen, it means it's popping its center. Or maybe it only puts out 2 or 3 rows of petals instead of a full bloom. It's popping its center. Dahlias all came from like clematis type looking dahlias. So they came from an open centered dahlia, and were taken back to England and hybridized to get us to where we are today with all the different varieties of full, giant, small, tight ball shaped dahlias. So genetically, sometimes a plant will go back or revert to its genetics and give us a popped center bloom. So usually it won't revert back to a full bloom. We would cull that and get rid of it, just because we don't want to risk multiplying a tuber or clump that doesn't seem to be genetically true to what we want it to be. It can also mean that its mother or father plant was an open center variety, and it's got a little bit of that genetics, maybe more than others. If you are just seeing pop center once in a while, it can be too much nitrogen. So make sure you have not done too much nitrogen. Like we talked, low nitrogen is really best for dahlias. Too much nitrogen gives us weak tubers for storing, gives us weak stems for cut flowers, for plants, and it gives you extra tall plants. They definitely need some nitrogen, so don't ever do a 0 in your nitrogen at the beginning of the growing stage. They definitely need nitrogen, and we hear from people all the time that say, dahlias don't need fertilizer. Really? Do you need food? Water? They need it too. So kind of think about that when you are thinking about the health of your plants in your yard. They need food. They're going to use it over time, and if you're not replenishing it in your yard, then your plants are going to struggle. And if you feel like they haven't done what they should, probably either need fertilizer or they need more water. The biggest challenge that we see with growing dahlias, not enough water. They need lots of water, just not at the beginning when they're starting to sprout. So definitely watch our videos about watering and about how much they need water, because you need to be getting water down 8-10 inches deep, down where those roots are. You don't want to be watering the top 1 or 2 inches by hand every day. You'll never reach the roots, so you're not doing your plants any benefit at that point.
If grown in a large pot, can they overwinter inside the greenhouse, or do they need to be dug up?
So a pot can be brought in, or it could be put in a greenhouse as long as it doesn't freeze over the winter. You kind of have to think about raised beds, pots. Instead of just the top layer being exposed, which tubers would be if they were planted in the ground, if they're in a pot, they're exposed on all sides. And again, they cannot be touched by freeze.
Do you like Osmocote fertilizer for your
Osmocote.
Osmocote?
Osmocote is
Dahlias?
great fertilizer. It's a slow release. Just make sure it's a low nitrogen, but yes.
Best way to cut dahlias for bouquets, so hot water question mark, and what are the best cut flower varieties?
100% hot water treatment. We would not leave a bunch leave our farm without hot water. So definitely do the hot water treatment. Watch our videos on that. Eric, how many bunches? We cut like 1,000 bunches
1,000 bunches each day.
at least, and every bunch is hot water treated. And so we really believe in hot water treatment. But you need to watch our video, because if you're not doing it right, then you haven't done any benefit. It's really important that you're at the right temperature, which is 160 to 180 degrees. Hotter than your tap water, but not boiling. Boiling is at 212, and if you're boiling your water, you are literally cooking your stem. So it's too hot, and they need to be in 2 to 3 inches deep in a plastic or a metal container, and they need to stay in that until the water cools, so about an hour. But again, you're gonna have to make sure your stems are at least 12 inches or more in length, and sometimes that's hard to do on a plant, but you're really doing a benefit to your plant. But you need to make sure the flower heads are not down close to the steam. Otherwise, the steam of the hot water will just cook those blooms also, and you'll be very unhappy with the results and not get the full effect of what the hot water treatment will do. It will leave a discoloration on the end of your cut stem, but that's just a watermark. It can be left on or cut off, and it goes in cold water from there on out.
I planted dahlias and now it's raining. It's not pouring, but it's raining. Should I be worried? Should I cover up?
As long as your temperatures are warm, a little rain is not going to hurt anything. We plan to have that in the our climate. That's why we recommend waiting a little longer to make sure your ground temperature is warm enough when you plant. But we're counting on Mother Nature to give us a little rain. We're expecting it today, which is why we moved our time up a little bit. Just because we didn't want to be out here when it was pouring. If it decides to pour, we don't know what it's going to do, if you can kind of see the sky. But as long as your water's not sitting and it's a short-term rain shower and the temperatures are still staying warm enough and not dropping real cold, then you're probably just fine, as long as it's not flooding rains.
If grown in pots, which do you recommend? Plastic, ceramic?
Any pot. They really will grow in anything. You can use any type of pot. Barrel, ceramic, plastic, anything you want. Just make sure the size is most important. The smaller the pot, the more often you're going to worry that it's going to struggle to stay watered enough during the summer. It's a little more challenging the smaller the planter. I would recommend going with shorter varieties if you have the option, just because they're easier to maintain.
What's the best variety for cutting, displaying?
Our favorite cut flower varieties. I think somebody else asked that question too, and I didn't cover it a few minutes ago. Eric, what are your favorite varieties to cut?
It's Michaela Miranda,
Michaela Miranda, item 153.
Diva,
Diva, item number 108. She's still available. Michaela's sold out, but Diva's still available.
it's 602.
602 Bridezilla. We know the varieties a lot by variety number, so those numbers don't change. And when you're working with them all day, you're working with the numbers.
There's a lot of numbers and names in my head, so sometimes I forgot the numbers. So
Any
sometimes
others?
it's hard.
Are those your favorites?
That's all my favorites.
When I was cutting, I don't get to do as much cutting as I used to do, but I loved Chilson's Pride, number 606. It's a light pink. It was probably my most favorite to go cut. I also like certain things for their color, and so I'm kind of drawn more to those, such as Sheer Heaven, Gabby's Wish, Blutiful. Those are all some of my favorites. Some of those are sold out. You know, if you like an open center variety, not very many of them are good for cut flowers, but there are a few that we cut. Bashful, Pooh, Apple Blossom, they're all stunning. Hula is newer on the market. We introduced her last year. She is gorgeous. She's still available. What else do we love to cut? Angels of 7A is probably one of the best reds. Patricia and Sunset. It's a little taller, gorgeous kind of tomato red. Teddy is a great orange. It's a water lily, so it's the flatter petaled style. Deputy Bob is a bright, kind of really hot flame orange, shorter plant. Some people like those shorter, stockier plants. Lights Out is probably my favorite in the blacks, but it's sold out. The only black one we've got is Voodoo, which was what we dug today. It's a great standby. It's been around forever, but it's the only black variety I think we have left.
Yeah, there is not much left.
Not much. So, you know, people are asking. I will give you a little update here. It's been an extremely busy 13 months, I would say, 14 months. Since last March, our business has been booming with everybody being home, gardening, and we can't say thank you enough. But luckily, we've been able to stay open. We've been able to stay healthy. We've been able to maintain our social distance and mask up. So it's been absolutely amazing the amount of orders coming in. The only downfall to that is we only have so much space for employees safely to work. So it means that our shipping time is just a hair slower this year. So if you're waiting for an order, please check out our shipping page under the help section on our website. You have plenty of time to plant if you're in the Northwest or in the north half of the US. So don't panic if you're saying my order's not coming until the middle of May. You really have plenty of time. You're actually going to catch up. What we plant, well, normally what we plant in April with what we plant at the end of May catches all up and evens out. This year we're not planted yet, so I can't say that, but that is true across the board. So just kind of know that you might think you're losing 2 weeks, you're really not. Your ground temperature will be that much warmer and everything will take off that much quicker. So we are out of more varieties than we've ever been at this time of year. We offer about 375 varieties. We are down to, I think, about 140 varieties. Now, that's still a lot. We hear from people every day saying, you're almost out of everything. Yeah, we are out of a lot, but there's still a huge amount available. And if you want to know our favorites, holler at me. I'll give you my favorites of what's left. But they're, you know, just because some are still available and some are sold out, just means some are more popular. We might grow more of certain varieties, such as Diva. Diva will definitely be the #1 seller for the year, and she's still available. We grow a lot of her, we cut a lot of her, so we have a lot of her. So good bulb producer, or tuber producer, so we've got lots of her. So I definitely, if you're planning on ordering, order soon. Today is your last day to get a free tuber for every $50 in tubers that you spend. The offer ends tonight at midnight, so make sure if you're planning on ordering and want to get free tubers, if you plan on spending $50, today is the last day to do that. Any other questions?
Yes. What would you consider warm enough temperatures? 40s at night and 60s in the daytime?
I'd even like to see it a little warmer than that. We'd like to see 60s during the day or 70s during the day and 50s at night. If you're still getting in the 40s, your ground temperature is still really pretty cool. We normally sell soil thermometers. We're out of them currently. We're waiting for the manufacturer, which I don't know when they're exactly coming, but great little simple thermometer you can stick in your soil and check the temperature. You could do it with a regular thermometer if it goes low enough for you, but you want that ground temperature, so sticking your thermometer in the soil at least 60 degrees. If it's not, if it's still in the 40s and 50s, you don't want to plant yet. Wait a few more weeks, it won't hurt anything.
What soil types are recommended? Sand, peat, loam?
You know, they really will grow in any soil. We don't have any problem with that. We are really lucky in that our soil is practically sand. It's from an old glacier millions of years ago. Montana Glacier is where it comes from, they say, but we are really, really sandy soil, and you watched Eric be able to knock the soil off, which allows us to be able to harvest all winter long. But really, if you have clay soil, if you have sandy soil, you're just gonna have to, it'll depend on how much water you need to give, how much fertilizer. Water's gonna go through quicker on sandy soil, it's gonna go through slower on heavier soil. Heavier soil is gonna hold water more during the winter time and be more dangerous for rotting out. Sandy soil is maybe a little better in that it's gonna drain better during the winter. So there's benefits to both of it, but really your dahlias will grow in any of it as long as it's not too rich with compost and it's able to be worked up and dried out before you plant.
How many dahlia plants do you recommend growing to have enough for cut flowers at home?
Ooh, how many dahlia plants? You know, we say at any one given time on a plant, you'll get 0 to 3 blooms. So that's kind of sounds odd, but it's true in that dinner plates take a long time to develop, which is why we don't consider them to be good dinner plates. Doesn't mean they can't be cut. They just take so long to develop on the plant that you don't get as many blooms, and by the time they're fully open, they're already starting to maybe get bad on the back. So, you know, in my own yard, I have 5 plants. because I'm here most of the time and don't have time to take care of them. I have lots of flowers, but I, have to have a little help with them because I'm not home in the summertime, and I haven't really been home at all this year. So I would tell you a good amount is probably 10. If that means to bring them into your own house and have a little extra to share, that's probably plenty. If you're meaning to have a cut flower stand, you're gonna need way more than that. So, or you're planning for a wedding, you're gonna need a lot more than that. You kind of have to think of 0 to 3 as your average of how many blooms at one given time. Because you're gonna have buds, you're gonna have old blooms, you're gonna have young blooms. So you're kind of having a cycle through. They're gonna start blooming in August and they're gonna go till frost. Your dinner plate varieties are probably not gonna start till September if you're here in the Northwest in our climate. Because most dahlias bloom about 90 days after planting. Your big giant dinner plates are gonna take about 120 days. Your little low growing varieties could be blooming in about 75 days. So kind of important to kind of think about what you're growing and what you wanna be able to do with them. And just know that the giants are amazing, but you don't get as many blooms off of them. But if you wanna have showstoppers, those are the guys to have.
I planted my tubers in pots and have them indoors until time to plant. What is your favorite way to harden them off before planting? Is it necessary?
Hardening off is only necessary if your nighttime temperatures are below 50 degrees. So really, if your night times are, once you're ready to plant outside, are above 50 and you've got nice warm days, you don't have to work to harden them off. If your temperatures are not at that point when you're almost ready, I would spend about a week bringing them out during the day, in at night, back and forth, trying to give them some exposure to even them out and get them ready for the transition.
That's all.
And that's all. Thank you so much, Eric. I hope you've had a great afternoon with us. Thanks for joining us. We're gonna try and, like we said, post this video so that we have access, or you have access to look at it at a later time. But if you have questions, please pick up the phone and call us. You're calling right here directly to our staff here at the farm. You might even get me. But reach out. We're here to help you. We love what we do, and our passion is dahlias. So let us share with you our joy and let us help you get exactly what we want you to get, which is the fulfillment of gorgeous dahlias in your yard. So thank you so much for watching. Have a beautiful weekend and take care.